So thank you, Jean Charest, for taking the time out of your busy schedule here to share some points of view. Can you give me a little bit of perspective about an overview, I suppose, on Canada's activity in terms of trade with Africa?
Well, the trade with Africa is still relatively modest if we compare to what we're doing with the United States, of course, and with the rest of the world. But Canada, like other countries, has taken a stronger interest in what's happening on the trade side in Africa relative to aid and presence in the Francophonie because of the emergence of these new economies and the stronger demand on natural resources. The Canadian angle is very interesting because when we refer to mining, oil and gas, though we're a relatively small country in terms of the number of people, we are a trader in mining, oil and gas. 50% of the world's investments in mining happen in Toronto at the Toronto Stock Exchange. And that translates into companies deploying all over the world, including Africa, and paying more attention to what's happening in Africa. And the same is true in oil and gas. So for Canada, Africa is taking on a whole new significance.
Do you have a perspective on our sort of reputation as it relates to corporate social responsibility and how Canadians are viewed from the point of view of their practices here in the continent?
We have an advantage at the outset because as a country, the branding of Canada is strong. And we're viewed as a pristine country, a country that's peaceful, a country who has espoused values that are much based on compassion and universal human values. As we, compare with the United States, for example, we have that advantage of being viewed as a non-imperialistic, non-colonialist country with two languages. So it's a great advantage from the outset. Now, in the mining sector, in regards to corporate social responsibility, I think we do have a good reputation. We're viewed positively, but that's not something that we can take for granted. It's something that's judged on a project per project basis, and we have seen instances of Canadian companies who've got themselves into trouble all over the world, rightly or wrongly, but they've been in the middle of controversy and they're relative to the implementation of projects, and so corporate social responsibility is something we take seriously generally, but not something we can take for granted. And the mistake would be to think that what applies in one community is true for another. It's what's behind it really is a very real effort and a sincere effort to work with a community. And that is something that has to be done on a project by project basis.
What would you say to organizations that want to launch into Africa that perhaps are concerned about some of the risks attached? You hear there's been some rather unfortunate things happen over here in terms of, and there's stereotypes as well, it seems to me. So how do you overcome that?
Well, what's true I think for every project is even more important for Africa. Research has to be very, very important. Research in terms of knowing about a country, about its history, about who the players are, but also the kind of research that should be done on the ground. If someone wants to invest in Africa, they absolutely have to go and see and touch and feel and get a sense for it themselves. Mm-hmm. And there are issues here that they will not find back home in terms, for example, of corruption, of bureaucratic management. Governments don't operate the same way. The capacity of governments is not the same. I had a file in one African country, and what you see, which is pretty much the typical scenario, is that the minister at the executive level is a very competent person. The person below him is a strong person, and then below that, there's not a lot of capacity. Which means that you have to work very differently than if you're working in a developed country, that you have to compensate, that you have to secure the people you're talking to, because they also look at us as people who are coming in to exploit their resources, and and you have to have the ability to put yourself in their shoes to understand how they see those who are offering foreign direct investment. If you're able to pay attention to that and understand it, then you're in a position where you can invest in a country and do well by your shareholders and do well by the country. But in the end, the community has to be a winner and the country has to be a winner.
Is there we'll wrap it up. I'm just wondering if there's something in general you'd like to share in terms of your experience on the ground here at mining in Indaba.
Well, mining in Indaba is interesting because beyond the cycle of mining, and mining, those in the industry know that all too well. There are cycles, ups, downs, the value of currency, name it, conflicts or whatever. Africa should be on the agenda of any resource company. If they are not asking themselves that question, where does Africa fit in this equation, then very frankly not doing their job. And Africa will play a more significant role as time will evolve, and that will go fairly rapidly. The other thing I'd recommend to those who are looking at Africa would be remember South America 40 years ago. And it's not exactly the same, but one of the things that will be similar, and that's how the governance of the countries will evolve over the next 40 years in Africa, and that'll be a very positive story. It's going to happen. And so if you look at where South America was 40 years ago and where it is now, and translate that into Africa, what it generally will tell you is that now's a good time to be here.
Sort of early new entry, you're going to be ahead of the pack.
Yes, for those who are. And there are countries that will, stand out. We already know a few of them. Ivory Coast, for example, has just been through a long period of conflict. And what I've seen in Ivory Coast is very positive. In leadership, institutional ability, stability, and there's a depth in terms of the bureaucratic ability and
stability.
Yeah. So look at it from that perspective, and this makes this continent a very interesting place. As Canadians, even better so because of language. We have the ability to be in West Africa talking their language. It's a huge advantage for us.
John, I really appreciate your time out of your busy schedule here. Thank you very much
Thank you
for taking the interview, and enjoy the rest of your time.
See you in Africa.